Well, I thought if we're talking about Tolkien, I thought it'd be best I pulled out my bribe. So Tolkien seems to be in the public eye right now in a very big way, both because of the Rings of Power, but also because of lots of other sort of media related releases that seem to want to coincide with it, for good and ill, and I might talk about that more in the future. But in this video, what I want to talk about is some of the criticism that Tolkien has been receiving in his writing. And up front, I want to say that some of this criticism is completely fair and completely worth discussing. The most obvious one, of course, being the accusations of racism that are leveled at Tolkien. It's something worth discussing, and ultimately I think other people have talked quite a lot about it, and better than I could about it. For me, the YouTuber Legal Kimchi, I think he's got a pretty good view on it. I kind of agree with it, that ultimately Tolkien, yeah, some of his stuff is a bit racist. And I agree with Kimchi that I don't think that was in any way malicious. It was more that Tolkien, like all of us, is a product of our time. And like Kimchi, I agree that if you shared your pain that his writings caused, he would be horrified and possibly even be willing to change. And the other thing that people criticize is Tolkien's simplistic view of good and evil, and it's where issues of culture, racism, and good and evil intersect that I think people are having a very disingenuous conversation, at least a conversation that doesn't take in the full picture of Tolkien's writing. And that's the 2 cents that I want to throw in this video, just filling out that fuller picture and showing that, firstly, whilst there are troublesome issues of racism in his texts, race does not necessarily denote evil, or at least villainy, and also that Tolkien's view of good and evil is not as simplistic as some people present it to be. So let's talk about orcs.
We're not going no further till we've had a breather.
So orcs are one of the focal points of criticism against Tolkien. And without trying to construct too much of a straw man, that criticism is largely along these lines. That the orcs are just simply bad guys. They're villains, they're just sort of stock obstacles there for the good guys to overcome, and therefore it's very simplistic and very childish. And of course, what makes it even more uncomfortable is that these orcs come from the south and east of the Middle-earth sort of region. And Tolkien himself, even in his letters, described the orcs as resembling that sort of stereotypical and racist depiction of the Mongols that came out, in the 15th, 14th century? And that is a problem. Let's be honest. I'm not going to downplay it, I'm not going to excuse it. That's not on. And whilst most excuses for this I got a little bit of sympathy for, I think on the whole we need to discourage as much as we can this kind of racial stereotyping. But you've probably heard all that before. What I want to focus on is other elements of characterization when it comes to the orcs, and really, again, fill out that picture in a way I haven't really heard anyone talk about yet. Because unlike the films, the orcs aren't just mindless grunts. They're actually characters who are given personality and dialogue. And when we look at that dialogue, we notice something quite interesting. So in the book, The Two Towers, Tolkien introduces us to a character called Shagrat. Shagrat is basically just an orc commander in the story. We won't go into too much detail here, but have a listen to some of his dialogue, and I'll try and read it in the most, I guess, unaccented, neutral way that this Australian can. I have my orders, and it's more than my belly's worth, or yours, to break 'em. Any trespassers found by the guards is to be held at the tower. Prisoners are to be stripped. Full description of every article, garment, weapon, letter, ring, or trinket is to be sent to Lugberts, I don't even meant to say that, at once, and to Lugberts only. And the prisoner is to be kept safe, intact, and under pain of death for every member of the guard. So for a gentleman in the early 20th century, if he wanted to play up this sort of Oriental style villain or a North African style villain, he could have chosen a very different set of dialogue. But what did we hear there? I have my orders. Here is a list of things that I am supposed to do in detail. I am reporting to some sort of superior. There is a certain efficiency and militarism in the way that this character talks, but not completely. As we saw in his dialogue, in that example, there are some contractions. In fact, there's more contractions further on in Shagrat. He seems to have a very uncouth way of speaking. And we see that elsewhere and more exaggerated in other bits of his writing. In The Hobbit, we have ourselves some cave trolls.
They have a cave troll.
Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinking bit of man flesh have we had for a long time, said the second. What the L William was thinking in bringing us to these parts beats me. And the drink's running short, and what's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull of his jug. William choked. Shut your mouth, he said, as soon as he could. So it's not just contractions. There's some very clear sort of working class British slang going into that. Tolkien intends this language not just to be harsh, but to be uncouth and simple and rough. So much so that the narrator later apologizes to the middle class sensibilities of the expected reader. So what's going on here? We have very martial language, but we also have very sort of uncouth, rough British language and slang coming from these characters. Well, things make a lot more sense when you look at Tolkien, his stories, and his beliefs. Once Tolkien had moved from South Africa, he had lived in rural England. For him, as a child in a relatively well set up place, an idyllic country lifestyle. But he also witnessed the expansion of industrialization into that idyllic world. Nothing new from any other analysis you've probably ever heard ever. But what we keep forgetting in the analysis of Tolkien doesn't like industrialization is implicit. Tolkien's not too keen on the people who are bringing about or in support of that industrialization. The factory owners, the factory workers to some extent, and their sort of rough working class culture. And this anti-industrialist mentality is confirmed late when we again encounter the goblins, the orcs, in The Hobbit. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions always delight them, and also not working with their own hands more than can be helped. For Tolkien, it seems that evil wasn't a nebulous concept. Evil was despising beauty in favor of avarice and want and wheels for purposes who knows what. For Tolkien, evil was laziness and using devious devices to be even more lazy. For Tolkien, evil was the joy of making something that would kill someone and admiring its efficiency at killing. For Tolkien, these ideas were evil. And for Tolkien, he showed that the orcs were the characters who most embraced those philosophies. For Tolkien, the evil minions would probably more represent mine workers, factory workers, and industrialists than they would some sort of oriental despot. And that comes with its own issues. I mean, some serious classist stuff going on there. But again, I'm not trying to excuse Tolkien. I'm also not trying to condemn him. I'm just trying to create a fuller picture of what Tolkien's world has to offer and meditations and reflections for us to think about when we read his work. Of course, there's one last twist to the tale when it comes to orcs. And the fact that even though Tolkien presents them as being intrinsically corrupted, they're not intrinsically irredeemable. So one of Tolkien's sort of legendary letters, he wrote that orcs were indeed bad, corrupted, broken, but he said that they were not irredeemably bad. But that would be going too far, because by accepting or tolerating their making necessary to their actual existence, even orcs could be a part of a grander plan. Orcs aren't just evil, they're just broken, corrupted. And that's the last challenge I kind of want to leave you with, because Tolkien was writing about his experiences, the world he understood, his worldview. And because of that, readers are able to relate to different aspects of the text. We'd love to relate to the friendship between Sam and Frodo. We hope for and resonate with Aragorn rising to the challenges that lay before him. And the more spectacular of us really connect with the beauty and the grace of the elves. But I want to challenge all you Tolkien fans out there to not just associate with the good in his stories, but with the brokenness. And realize that for Tolkien, a lot of the orcs are corrupted and broken because, well, humans are. We too can desire greed over beauty. We too can seek power over friendship. We too can be just as bad as the orcs. And we too are not irredeemable. And I think that idea is just a little bit more complicated than just simply good guys and bad guys. But of course, what do you think? Let me know, write down the comments down below, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much. See you later. Well, hopefully you'll see me again later. Bye. Very civilized.